It was then that I made my great discovery. In the shadows of the far corner, crumpled against the baseboard, lay some dirty sheets of paper. Sitting down upon the floor, I smoothed them out with trembling hands. They were inside pages of a magazine. I read its name, The Caged Bird Fancier, and the date, July 1944. Only an archaeologist can imagine how intensely, or only an archaeologist can imagine the intensity of my excitement at that moment. Here was an actual tiny fragment of the future itself, palpable to my present-day fingers. It had been manufactured by men who could answer offhand many of those burning questions which still perplex the wisest mortals of 1949. Shaking with eagerness, I began to read. I suppose I was very silly. I suppose I ought to have realized from the start the utter futility of my search, but I was too perturbed to be capable of reasoning. My mind shouted questions. Had the United States jumped into the war? Had there been a revolution? What is happening in Europe, in China, in the Near East? And the men of the future, as if teasing my impatience, would only answer, it is rather difficult to give exact dimensions for stock cages, as they often have to be built to suit the individual breed's accommodation. Generally speaking, however, they should be no less than 36 inches long, 12 to 15 inches high, and 12 inches wide. For all the information it gave me, The Caged Bird Fancier might equally well have been written in Turkish or Japanese. Yet I read on, with the obstinacy of desperation. We have a hen siskin which was very fussy about feeding her young, and it was quite by chance that my father squeezed a mealworm after breaking its head off and gave it to her when she was sitting on the nest. If anyone can make chaffinches feed their young solely on the suitable soft food consisting of a really scientific formula, most of our troubles would be at an end. Most of our troubles, indeed. I cursed the single-mindedness of the monomatic. Owing to the present conditions, at last, I thought, now we're getting on track of something. The June meeting of the Winchester Audubon Society had to be postponed. I read on avidly, only to discover that the society was in a state of temporary suspension because 3 of the most prominent members had lately died. I read on, learning all manner of highly relevant and unfruitful facts, that the legs of a canary will sometimes denote its approximate age, that narrow perches are best for birds which have slip claw, that baldness is not unusual among greenfinches. These tiresome details are imprinted upon my memory forever, but nowhere could I find a trace of any wider implication. And even as my eyes hurried along the last lines of the print, I knew in the deepest marrow of my bones that I had outstayed my welcome. Come along now, something seemed to mutter in my ear. It's time, you must be getting back. No, I protested. Wait, give me one more moment. But the singing noise was growing louder inside my head. My sight was diminishing fast. Painfully, I spelled out the concluding sentences. Time, unfortunately, prevented my visiting any more Waterbury fanciers, but I hope to pay them a return visit at some future date. In the meantime, I should just like to add, everything went black. Clenching the paper in my 2 fists like a fraying lifeline, I pitched forward into oblivion. When I recovered consciousness, I found myself in bed in my own room, with Mabel hovering anxiously around me. It was she who had discovered me when she came upstairs to call me down to tea, lying senseless on the trunk-room floor. Was there anything in my hand? I asked her, and she replied, Yes, I found them all right. Don't you remember? Found them? I echoed stupidly. Why, yes, the photographs. One of them rather crumpled, but I'll iron it out. And now you're not to talk any more. The doctor will be here in any moment. The doctor, when he arrived, could find nothing much the matter. He advised a thorough rest, a little trip to the Cape later on. Both he and Mabel were curious to know the exact circumstances under which my fainting fit took place. I answered their questions as vaguely as possible. I had decided, of course, to tell them nothing. I had no wish to end my days in a mental home. And now here I am, waiting for whatever may come next. Sometimes I feel frightened, but in general I manage to regard the whole business quite philosophically. I am well aware that the next adventure, if there ever is another, may be my last. The conditions of time travel may prove too violent for my elder frame. Perhaps I shan't survive the journey, but I wouldn't refuse to make it on that account. Even if I could, what other experience can be comparable to this? What else have I to live for now? So let the moment call for me when it will, at whatever time and whatever place, I shall be ready. And that's the end.